legend when I'm in the city. Wall Street in the ghetto with me, running for freedom. Voice of the people, ain't never gonna leave them. All my life, wanted to be an American legend. Look at me, American legend. All this time, wanted to be an American legend. Look at me, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. My first Del 25.
Welcome to the American Business Podcast. I'm your host, President. I am extremely blessed. We are extremely blessed today to have one of the forefathers of modern American impact investing, the illustrious, the honorable James Rosebush.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor for me to be with you.
Well, I wanted to bring you on to this podcast because, quite frankly, you've had an impact on my life in just the brief period of time that I've gotten connected with you, and I really thought that it's important to share our connection for several reasons. The first and foremost, you being a man of faith, me being a man of faith in terms of the lowest common denominator. And being men of faith, it is impossible to know how God's going to bless you. And as I've said, and for the viewers, I'm just going to give a brief recap of Mr. Rosebush's bio. But he came from Flint, Michigan, first and foremost. That's correct, right?
Correct. Right.
So when most people think of Flint, we think of magic, we think of the pollution in the water. But this is another add to that, so I would have never guessed that. And then he went from Flint, Michigan. He ultimately ended up becoming an advisor in the White House in the early 1980s with President Ronald Reagan. And that's correct as well, right, sir?
Correct.
And then in his work in the White House, he transitioned into being a leader in corporate philanthropy as well as impact investing from Washington, D.C. to the rest of the world. Now, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And we were fortunate enough to be connected through a great colleague in New York, Iva Kaufman. And she said, look, you got to meet James. When you meet Mr. Rosebush, you'll really vibe. And again, you know, in a very short period of time that we've connected, this man has been a big blessing. And he actually recently released a book. It's called Winning Your Audience. Communicating your message like a president. I actually read the book. I had the audio version and I actually read through it. And I want to say that as someone that is preparing to speak to the world for the rest of my life, some of those principles in that book and the confidence in terms of demystifying how President Reagan, especially who's known as the great communicator, was able to convey his messages, and other great leaders from the Dr. Kings and on were able to convey their messages and making that bite-sized and palatable for someone that may not necessarily see themselves have the confidence of being a great speaker, but aspires to, is something that Mr. Rosebush is in the forefront of. So we'd love for you to get into just a bit more about your context, about your background, and fill in some of the blanks. I know I gave the people a high-level overview, but tell them how this guy from Flint, Michigan ends up being a world's foremost authority on public speaking.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. And right back at you. It's a blessing for me to have met you. I appreciate Iva bringing us together because we do connect on many different issues and many different levels. And I consider you a real brother. So thank you for sustaining that relationship. You mentioned me having been from Flint, Michigan. It was interesting. As kids, right, we had a stream near our house. And we thought on Monday it would run yellow, and on Tuesday it would run red, and on Wednesday it would run green. And we thought as little kids, we thought, wow, this is a magical stream. But of course it was pollution from the automobile plants that were headquartered in Flint. And Flint has this interesting history, of course, of migration from the South and providing people who are moving up from the South opportunities to become educated, to work in factories and accumulate wealth and establish a real middle-class environment, which is very interesting. And after I graduated from college, I had an opportunity to start working for the foundation and family office of the founder of General Motors. And his objective was to improve conditions throughout the community. And I was assigned the responsibility of working with the education institutions to help improve how they were actually serving the community. And what I was asked to do after we were taken, by the way, hostage, we had one day, I think it was the fourth day I was at work, we had automatic machine gun fire going through the glass front door of our office. We all dove under our desks, and we were there. I was under my desk for about 5.5 hours until the SWAT team came and led us all down the fire escape, the back of the building. But the person who was the head of the office said to me 3 weeks later, "I'd like you to start a strategic planning initiative to answer one question. Are we having impact? Are we having impact through what we give and donate through our philanthropic foundation? And are we having impact through our investments?" Now, at that time, Michael, the word impact was only used to describe an impact, an accident, a head-on collision between two cars. Now, impact, people had to search for, in terms of philanthropy and investment, what do you mean by impact? So I created algorithms that would help us ascertain whether or not every dollar we were spending and investing in specifically in poverty areas, in areas where there were underperforming schools, where there were tremendous health issues in the community, where there were unreported number of non-live births. And I took all of those together and I said, and I still wish we did this today. I took all of those together and I identified the highest and most complicated neighborhoods that really needed to have all of these issues addressed. So that, in other words, we were pouring money into the places that needed to be served and the places that need to have these complicated and confounding issues really addressed. So that was the first time that anything like that was done. And I conducted a meeting, a training meeting, policy meeting for the foundation trustees and the staff, and we all began to focus on that way. Little did I know 10 years later, I would be invited into the Reagan White House to start the first White House Office on Impact Investing and Impact Philanthropy. So in my travel up to the White House, I ran the Standard Oil Foundation and other foundations, and that gave me opportunity to, and I started 4 schools. I was very, very interested, fixated on why it is that we have underperforming schools. Why is it that we're failing young people? They don't even want to go to school because they don't even feel safe in school. And, all of these issues have to be addressed in order to improve the fabric of society for everyone. And if you think that there's a lot said today for good reason about there not being equality in a lot of different areas, but I think few of these people really understand why we don't have equality. And when you really dig into the issues of education, transportation, economic education, all of these things have been lacking. And I think these are the things that I'm really interested in, because you can talk about all the issues from a surface level, which I think we're doing a lot of today. I think people are trying to dig under these issues, but I like to get behind it, and I like to say, what's really going on here? What is going on here? Why do we have this lack? So, for example, one of the foundations I started was to help turn around the public schools in Washington, D.C. Well, my focus was to bring technology, instructional technology, into the classroom so that all schools, regardless of where they're located and who attends those schools, those students would have access to using technology to accelerate their learning and on an individualized basis. Well, I was basically run out of the schools because there was a lot of resistance, not on the part of teachers or principals, but on the part of the administration and of DC Public Schools. At that time, and they've made a lot of progress since then, but at that time, they resisted this. Well, this is what schools in wealthy neighborhoods were getting. I felt that all schools, all students should have access to this. So these are the kinds of things. In the White House, we worked on public education, public health, public transportation, all of these areas where the government had been responsible for addressing inequality, had been addressing, for example, in the case of, good example would be public housing. So at that time, these massive public housing blocks were being torn down because they were an experiment in disaster, housing all these people in these high rises. The conditions, as the municipalities, the housing authorities, they weren't taking care of them. They were rat infested. We still have this in New York City. I think that's intolerable. I think it's inexcusable for any politician to even be elected and to stay in position when people are inhabiting public housing units that are filled with rats, vermin, and rusty pipes, low water quality. What excuse do we have for that? We live in a modern era when we can address this and we can get these situations solved. If I were a politician and public housing in my jurisdiction was that quality, I'd have to resign and I'd have my tail between my legs. Anyway, they don't seem to look at it that way. I feel that people should be held accountable for how they manage this investment in communities. I think this is absolutely critically important. And that's what we tried to do in this program that I was running in the Reagan White House. And what we were able to accomplish was a whole new model of what is public housing. People deserve to live in fine quality, well-maintained, basic housing that addresses their needs, but is also maintained in a way that, that any person and any family deserves to have. We found, going back to my work at the Mott Foundation, that we also had to address the issue of employment and employment training on a basic level, because as I could see through my research and my discussions with people in the community, there were a lot of people that weren't even ready to go into job training because they had no role models in their homes. They had no capacity to say, oh, you need to set your alarm at 6:30 this morning. You need to get up, get dressed, find your way to a job training center. A lot of these people wouldn't go to job training because they had no role model, they had no discipline in their households to say, this is what you have to do. Plus, they didn't see what the incentive was to do it. So we had to work on these basic fundamental principles to uplift the whole community and uplift individuals into positions of responsibility and better education, better preparation, better training, and to put them in a position to begin to accumulate wealth and to be able to lift their standard of life. And these are the things I think that have to be addressed on a local community level. But I would have to say that politics has gotten in the way of this much more than it has been helpful. And these are just a few of the things that I've done in my life. I've seen that for example, I started the first school without walls in Boston called the Learning Guild. It wasn't just me, but it was a whole group of us were involved in that. And the school department said, first they said, what are you talking about? We want to take kids in the neighborhoods to the fire departments, to the police department, to the museums, to the zoos, all these places, and to have learning modules there because, it's patently known you can learn so much more by being out in the world in a guided, instructional way than you can sitting in a classroom. And of course, first they were like, are you kidding? There's absolutely no way we're going to allow you to do that. Well, slowly we convinced them and they began to see that you can, in a structured way and be held accountable for it, you can learn by being out in the community and seeing these different community assets and respecting them. And I wish that more of that were done today. Another school that I was honored to be the first president of was the Challenger Memorial Foundation. So after the Challenger astronauts went down, the families of the astronauts decided they want to continue the mission and they wanted kids to be able to learn space science education. So we created 48 schools around the world that were based in other schools to provide curriculum for kids at a young age to sit in front of a console and to have virtual space science education to go up and to continue the mission, to go out into space, and to give kids an idea that the future is yours. You can do anything with it. There's an opportunity there for you. You have to break barriers, no question. Every kid has to break barriers. Kids are confronted today. All types of kids are confronted with all kinds of barriers. That doesn't mean they can't be broken. And we have great role models that show it. But anyway, I'll stop there. You may have some questions, but I can also tell you a little bit about why all of those experiences led me, or maybe I should just say that my dad he gave me three things that he was. He was a business executive. He worked for General Motors. He was a musician, and he taught public speaking. And I would say that he was passionate about all three. And he made me, I would say he made me, but he gave me the opportunity. So I became a business executive, growing companies around the globe. I became a musician, and I became an instructor.
Hold on. I didn't know you made music. You gonna spit a 16? No, you know on my podcast, I asked every guest to rap at the end of it. And my first guest was an illustrious rap star as well. So I actually didn't know that about you. You got something for the people?
I don't think I have anything that would be of interest particularly today, but I had what he's interesting. So when he was in his, I guess he was a teenager, right? He and his brother were, what do you call, identical twins. And they both played the trumpet. And they grew up in Flint, Michigan. They went to New York to start a career, and they were kind of taken for a short period of time because then the war started, World War II, and they had to go into the war. But for a time, they were very popular because they were identical twins playing the trumpet together. So they had a gig. And then my dad also played the piano much better than I do because he played by ear. So you could say, Dad, play this song. He could sit down and play it for you. I mean, that blows my mind, that skill. But anyway, he gave me those three things. So he trained me as a kid in being a public speaker. So then when I learned a million things from Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, I knew I had to start imparting this skill to other people. And this is my third book, which you see behind me, Winning Your Audience. This is a #1 bestseller, Amazon #1 bestseller. So people are just grabbing it off the shelves because speaking is empowerment. Speaking is empowerment, but it has to be done in the right way, because a lot of speaking is done through anger. A lot of speaking is done through ignorance. A lot of speaking is done in ways that is not going to be received by the audience. So why waste your time? So in this book, some of the great examples I have, and this book is filled with how do I do it? How do I do it? How do I create a bridge to my audience? How do I, what's the architecture of a great speech? But I use examples like Frederick Douglass, for example. Now, Frederick Douglass is one of everyone's incredible hero, right? So Frederick Douglass, he actually found freedom and liberty through speaking. And he was such an authentic person that when he was speaking, all over the East Coast, and of course became a close personal friend of President Lincoln. But in his speaking, he had such authenticity. We talk about Dr. King. Why does his message resonate? You know why? Because he loved. He was a man of love. He loved his audience. He loved the people that he was talking to. And in his mountaintop speech, he elevates the discourse. He doesn't bring it down. He elevates it. And you know something? This is what Ronald Reagan exemplified, I think, so well. Ronald Reagan knew that when you tell people they're good, they respond much better than telling people, man, you are a trouble, dude. You're messed up. Okay? Ronald Reagan would tell you, you're made in the image and likeness of God. You have everything to look forward to. You have a life that you can determine for yourself. You are good. God made you that way. And that's the way Ronald Reagan taught, and that's exactly the way Dr. King taught. And that's why it resonated, and that's why these people are known as great preachers and great speakers. Ronald Reagan was going to go to divinity school. He was going to become a preacher. I say that if he had, he might have ministered to thousands, maybe in a lifetime. He became an evangelist to millions of people because his voice and his message were heard around the world. That is his durable and lasting legacy, what he did for the rest of the world. But he wanted everyone to be free. But Michael, the reason he wanted them to be free and free of the encumbrances of government telling you what to do at all times, because if you begin to worship the government, you have to give something else up. That would be the worship of God. And the worship of God is the only thing that's going to give you freedom. And Ronald Reagan knew that. So he wanted people to be free to worship God because he knew that was the primary relationship that we have in life. Our primary relationship is with God. And that's what he knew, and that's what Dr. King knew. That's why what they said resonates so much today. We need more people talking like this, Michael. We need more people telling the world, you're good, you're not limited, you're not bad, you're not a criminal. You have all the fundamental rights that God gave you. Now rise up and take that mantle of freedom and responsibility, which have to be combined, and go forward with that. That's what these speakers knew, and that's what they imparted to people. And that is why they had such, going back to this, impact. Right?
Man, you hit on a lot. I wanna take it back. I want to take it back and ask a question. So if those people hadn't stormed that office with those automatic weapons and fired those shots, does your position get created? Does your superior at your workplace ask you that question? How do we measure how effective we are being in the community?
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So our life is a series of vignettes which we build on, and our life is a divine design. It's not a human design. God is putting us into, if we're listening, God is putting us into, giving us opportunities. If we're listening and we're alert, and this is not anything, now was that anything that I could have planned? When I went in the White House, I went in another role representing the president to the business community. And one day he was like, we're going to start this initiative. And I think that we could contract with an outside organization, like a nonprofit, to start this impact investing and philanthropy program. And okay. And then they said, well, wait a minute, maybe you should run it inside. Well, they didn't necessarily know what happened that day, that those gunmen took us hostage in 10 years before that. They didn't know that story, but every person's life is a developing story. And it's a question of, are you going to leave behind a mess, a trail of distraught people and communities? Or are you going to leave behind a trail of good in what you've done for the world, for your community, for your family, for yourself? So I would say that, to answer your question, would it have ever happened? I can't answer that question. Maybe other things would have happened, but I will tell you this, that the man who was the son of the founder of General Motors, who was my boss, he was the president of his family's foundation, which is significant. Now it has billions of dollars now that in assets, right? So it's a major foundation. And he was a wonderful person, but not particularly on fire about anything. I want to tell you something. After that happened, and he had to be thrown in a safe, a room-sized safe, like a room that's a safe. I don't know if you ever seen one of these, and it's got a big lock on it, right?
Right.
So that's where he was thrown to be safe from these terrorists, right? So he was protected. The rest of it, there were no killings or death or anything like that. But so he comes out of that safe. I'm just thinking about this. Do you ever know in the Bible where It says, go into your closet and shut the door.
Yes, sir. I know that. I know that. Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
well, think about this for a minute. That man was thrown into his closet. And what else? Lock the door. Now, why is that important?
Woo! You
Okay, now
lying?
why
Nah.
is that important?
Whoa.
Why is that important? Because you lock out all the mess that's going on in the world, and you get alone with your thoughts, and you get alone with God. So he goes in there. I don't know what he was thinking, or he's probably scared to death. I don't know what's going on, right? But he goes in that room, and that room is locked. So when he comes out, guess what? He became a new man. All of a sudden, he was like on fire. Why do you think he came to me and he asked me to do this?
He found God in that closet, brother.
Well, he found a new purpose in life.
Amen.
Okay. And I wrote about this, years later, and I contacted, by that time, he might have passed away. I forget when I wrote this first article. So I sent it to his daughter and I said, I don't want to say anything that, he didn't, or I don't want to misrepresent him, because to me, this is what happened to him. He became alive as a person. For the rest of his life, and I invited him to come to the White House when I worked in the White House and everything. And he was a very special person, but I would say for that period in his life, from that experience on until it ended, he became a person who was much more alive, much more alert, much more fired up about, his role in the world. Before that, I think maybe he was wandering a little bit. And so I sent it to his daughter. I said, I don't want to say anything that was untrue or misrepresents your dad. And she said, no, I agree with you.
So let me go a little bit deeper. And this is something that I've been contemplating and mulling on with other people that I respect. And it's a twofold issue. A, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. Now, we can essentially distill the God of the New Testament to the love, right? The Jesus, just radical, revolutionary love. However, in the Old Testament, if we are honest, and even in Revelation a lot as well, we see a lot of warfare, a lot of destruction, a lot of cleansing. And one of the issues of today in which we see is that change is happening. However, change is happening as a response to death and violence, and even more uncanny than previous eras, that violence is being broadcast 24/7 on social media, and these issues in terms of civilians and police and the brutality being endured is finally getting experienced by people of all colors that are now joining this march. And I've really been coming to grips with American history. We've had this conversation, in a smaller degree, but is it possible to have revolution or systemic change without bloodshed?
Well, I don't know. Of course, bloodshed was the loss of lives in the Civil War was absolutely mind-boggling. So there was a tremendous loss of life to defeat slavery at that time. But, I have to say this, though, and Dr. King says this as well, that you can have a bloody war and you can have protests, and there's no question that the example I just gave you of this man changing his life, turning his life around because of violence, that sometimes these things have to occur to shake us up and make us confront ourselves.
Even Dr. King getting killed as well, right? It's people that we respect, George Floyd getting killed, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on.
I know. I don't think that, I was reading something this morning that Tolstoy says. He said, we always talk about changing the world, but we rarely talk about changing ourselves. So the real way to bring about change is to address our own personal inadequacies, our own personal point of view that may be limiting to ourselves and others, our own racism, our own hatred, our own, the things that dwell in our heart. Because you can have violence and you can change laws, you can change practices, you can change regulation, but it doesn't mean you change the heart. So, for example, police officers who have, and they have mandatory in-service training every year that they have to go through. You can have all kinds of stuff like that. You can, and it is important to have it, and it is important to be much more. We have to address all of those things, no question. But the fundamental change has to happen within, and there's a massive, I would say, particularly today, because society is so ego-driven. You know, I'm great. I'm the, you know, you're talking about yourself all the time. People are promoting, you know, self-promotion, self-aggrandizement, all of the ego. You know, so much of society is ego-driven, and you're told, you know, get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and say, "I can do this." You're, you know, you're great. You're blah 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 blah. Well, where's the humility, or where's the self-introspection that says, do I harbor any resentment? Do I harbor any hatred? Do I harbor any conflict? Do I harbor resentment? Do I harbor any of these things in my heart? Because change, the only real change that ever happens is in a person's heart.
How would you rate the effectiveness, A, of the administration you work with in the White House, and B, of the Christian church, and especially the white evangelical church, and grappling with these issues of racial and social justice that we are currently now facing as a nation?
Well, that's a massive question you asked me. So you know, that would take like a week to talk about that.
Or even just the solutions, even in terms of things that you would like to see addressed in order to create that legacy that we both know is only possible through the Most High.
I think that bringing people together, I think that bringing people together on the basis of respect for what they bring to the table, which oftentimes is very different than what you have. And this has nothing to do with race. It has to do with each individual person comes to the table or to a discussion with different backgrounds, different viewpoints. One of the things I talk about in my book, Michael, and this is absolutely critical, this is absolutely fundamental and so important for people to get. When you say something and I listen, I'm hearing it according to the filter in my mind, heart, and soul. People don't get that. They think that if you look at a person and you say, you know, I want a job, or or if anyone's giving a, you know, they're standing up and they're toppling a statue, or they're just, you know, sitting in your living room and they're making, you know, sharing some kind of conversation, the way you hear it is different than the way the person who's speaking it thinks you hear it. You follow me?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is the only, people have to recognize this, because you have to be an effective communicator, you have to force your way into the hearts of these other people. I'm going to tell you a little story. So I took Nancy Reagan we went to a drug abuse center graduation, and there were thousands of people, right? It was a massive gymnasium, and there were kids, all races, you know, on one side. They had gone through drug rehab, and the parents or the guardians or, you know, family is on the other side. And then there was the person who had the head of the drug rehab center in the middle, and he would read off a kid's name, and they would say, you are, you know, you're clean, you graduated from the program, you get to go home. And the kid and the parent ran toward the center of the room, collapsed in each other's arms. Everyone in the entire massive auditorium, this went on for like 3.5 hours. Everyone was crying. The Secret Service was crying. They don't cry, Secret Service. They're not allowed to cry.
Right.
The White House press corps, they were crying, right? Now, some of the students didn't get to go home because they were not clean, right? They had to stay in the program.
Right.
So we're sitting there. I'm sitting next to First Lady Nancy Reagan, and she had these prepared remarks that she was supposed to give at the end, right? And after going through that whole thing for 3.5 hours, she and I looked at each other, and we took those speech remarks, those written remarks. You know what we did? Rip them. How could you stand up and give some kind of, read a speech after you've been through that? Okay? So she goes to the center of this massive gymnasium. She takes a mic in her hand, and she turns to the parents, talks to them, turns to the kids. You know what she's saying?
What's she saying?
I love you. I know the pain in your heart. I know this is talking to the parents. I know what you've gone through. Parents, family, grandmother, whatever it is, right? And she turns to the kids. I love you. I'm here to support you. You have a great life ahead of you. I'm so proud of you for the work you've done and the work you're going to continue to do to get clean. Okay. This was her listening to their pain. And you know what? The White House press corps, they said to me, dude, what happened to this woman tonight? Don't ever forget this. They said, what happened to her tonight? We thought she was just a, plastic person.
Right.
Okay? So in the motorcade on the way back to the hotel that night, I told her one of my favorite sayings. Whenever the heart speaks, no matter how simple the words, they are always acceptable to those who have hearts. This is what we have to learn. We have to meet our audience where they are and the pain that they're feeling. And when we do, and you see today, I'm so amazed and so impressed and grateful for so many people who stand up and really pour out their heart. That is what is going to really make a difference, is to pour out your heart in a way that can be understood by the people who are listening. That is one of the most valuable things that I can teach you or coach you, or you can learn from me reading this book.
There's a sign very close to me, a big sign, many stories tall, that says America is too great for small dreams. And I would love to ask you, of course, that's the President Reagan quote, what's your biggest dream for this country, this world, and the kingdom to which you serve?
I think my biggest dream is that it continues to live free. And it is a country that offers freedom and possibility and continues to serve as the light of the world. Because I can tell you, and this is what I'm so afraid of, Michael, that if our country descends into a country of socialism, governed with people's lives governed by the state, the light of individual opportunity and freedom, which this country bears, imperfect as it is, better than any other country, the rest of the world will go into chaos. God has put this country into the hands of people who can determine. President Reagan said, remember, we're only one generation from losing freedom. Every generation has to fight to make sure that every person in America has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and guaranteed by our Constitution. As I say, we're still working it out. But I'm telling you, the people in Venezuela don't have any opportunity to work it out. The people in Russia don't have any opportunity to work it out. The people in China don't have any opportunity to work it out. We are the light that's been placed here for the world. That's what Ronald Reagan truly believed. And he had this incredible way of using metaphors to talk about more concepts that were perhaps more difficult to understand. But if you take this metaphor of the light of America, and again, as imperfect as it is, we're all working toward improving, but the fundamental truth of America is based on freedom for everyone. And I can't say that there's any other country that has a constitution that's really built on principles. Most countries are built on dynasties, or they're built on territory that's been divided up, or they're built on language. America is built on precepts and principles, and we need to come together to improve. Every generation needs to improve on the practice of those principles. But we need to be free and unfettered from the control of government. We have to have individual rights to be able to pursue happiness in this country, unencumbered by other people telling us what to do. Of course, we have to have laws, we have to have justice, we have to have a structure, a federalist structure that keeps the peace. There's no question. But we all need to be working toward the improvement of this ideal.
Got it. I hear a lot about you really believe in America. Now, my question to you, and this will be my last, what do you say to people who, even like myself, feel like America has yet to really belong to me, in a sense to which many people, and whether they admit it or not, and I've just worked up the courage to admit it, I feel like much of my life I've lived as a second-class citizen. And even though I've been able to experience some of the greatest aspects of America, and quite frankly, I'm often the only person that looks like me in a lot of the rooms that I go to, I also know that simple things, such as driving down the street, I have to fight in order to keep my mind high enough and be prepared for certain inevitabilities from which my life can be threatened for arbitrary reasons and factors antithetical to the purposes of America. So, we've had enough, convos, and I've seen enough of the world and experienced enough great things, but me or any other extremely successful African Americans, you're hearing, some of the most influential guys, the billionaires, even the Robert Smiths, the Bob Johnsons, say that, I've been through things that you can't even imagine, and that are only inflicted upon me for my race. So what do you say to the tens of millions of Americans that feel like they have yet to experience the America that you love and that you speak so passionately about?
Ronald Reagan said, America's best days are still ahead.
Ooh.
So I would say,
I like that.
I get it. I get what you're saying, only in the way that I can.
Right.
But I haven't experienced all the things that you just mentioned. But that doesn't mean I can't love you for or understand you for what you have gone through, and what you continue to go through. But isn't that what life is about? Other people may struggle with other kinds of things, but there's no question that these are things that the light and the structure and the gift of America to the world is the only structure that is ever going to bring about a situation where you don't feel unsafe driving down the street and you don't feel like you're the only person in the room that looks the way you do. That is something that you and I have to join hands together and be dedicated to achieving. But I can tell you one thing for sure. The people in this country who want to turn it into a socialist country that is controlled by the state, which means basically controlled by what they think, will never get us there. That will never get us there. It is by taking up the reins of responsibility based on our constitutional rights and our constitutional structure of government, and just confronting these evils and confronting these ills one by one, person by person, addressing them in an impactful way, and every day just making as much progress as you can. You know, I remember someone saying to me, well, a leader is just a person who's had a lot of troubles and has confronted them and used them as stepping stones. You think people that are leaders or wealthy or they're heads of companies or whatever, you think they haven't suffered in their own way? I'm not comparing them to you, but I'm just saying, you know, you mentioned some African American leaders there. Everyone suffers in some way, but it's a question of whether you use the things you suffer to climb up and out of. Now, there's no question that systemic issues in communities, in all kinds of institutions, need to be addressed. But, Michael, how can they be addressed? How can they be addressed? They can only be addressed by what's in your heart. You can only, a system or form of government or a structure is only as good as the people who run it and manage it. Because you can take any form of regulation or any form of bureaucracy, and you can corrupt it. We have a lot of examples of that. Okay, you can turn it into, use it for your own political purposes. It's only as good as the people,
Amen.
as the hearts of those people. And so I'm saying that what I'm looking for is in a call for individual reformation. Isn't that really what our nation needs? A call for individual reformation. That's why Dr. King, and I had the great honor of working for the Martin Luther King Foundation.
Did you see the Joe Osteen, John Gray interview?
No.
So Joe Osteen, who obviously is one of America's foremost pastors at
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, in Houston, but one of his mentees, John Gray, who is the lead pastor of Relentless Church in Greenville, South Carolina, they had an amazing discussion. And I've seen a lot of pastors like Stephen Furtick from Elevation and TD Jakes. It's just these multicultural conversations about the role of the church leading forward in ways us as equity holders in the kingdom of God and followers of the way, our fiduciary obligation, so to speak, to rid of this institutional racism. And I brought that up because the way in which that inspired me, I could feel like this conversation and us reigniting that hope and flame in America having an impact on a lot of people. And I've even been hearing people that I look up to greatly, that I'll listen to for motivation, that have said that they've given up on equality in America. But I'm grateful sincerely for you for bringing me into different realms. And I really want us to link arms and go to the next level in terms of ensuring that the America that you really believe in is accessible to so many people that just don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, you told me once that President Reagan will start meetings in prayer. And I was hoping that you could close out this podcast with just a prayer for America and bless us.
Okay. So prayer is not just imploring God to do something. It's a prayer to open our hearts and our thoughts and our minds to acknowledging and feeling that God is the only power.
Amen. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
God is the only judge.
Hallelujah. Praise
God is the only lawgiver.
Praise God.
He loves every one of his creatures, every one of his ideas. And he sustains and supports and supplies every one of his children. Every one of his children is precious in his sight. Help us, O Lord, to understand this better and to feel the love that God has for everyone. For in feeling that love for others, we feel the love that God has for us. Help to humble us, to bring us to our knees, to help us cleanse our own thought in our lives of any judgment, condemnation, ill will, hatred, anger. Because we know, God, you have created us to follow you in your paths of peace and reconciliation. Help us to be forbearing of others, to desire each day to do nothing but to help our brothers and sisters, and to carry your light, your righteousness, and your love through our families, through our lives, through our schools, through our communities, so that everyone will feel this light and care and certainty that you provide. You are the maker. You have made heaven and earth. You are the one we adore. You are the one we worship. And in worshiping you, we obey your law of love.
Your love.
Amen.
Amen. I feel the renewed purpose. Thank you so much, and thank everybody for watching. I appreciate you.
All my life, wanted to be an American legend. Look at me, American legend. All this time, wanted to be an American legend. Look at me, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. American legend, American legend. My first L 25K.